There is a number that lives quietly in the back of most men's minds when it comes to sexual performance. A number they have never seen clearly stated, but that they carry as a private standard against which they silently measure themselves. That number is whatever they believe the average duration of intercourse to be. Whatever they have absorbed from cultural osmosis, media, conversation, and the general ambient noise of a culture saturated with unrealistic representations of sex. And for a very significant proportion of men, that number is substantially wrong in a direction that creates entirely unnecessary anxiety about their own performance. Today, I am going to give you the real number, not from opinion, not from cultural mythology, but from actual peer-reviewed research using objective stopwatch measurement from real couples during real sexual encounters. And I am going to do something that I think is equally or more important. I am going to give you a thorough and honest clinical framework for understanding what that number means, what it does not mean, why the anxiety that most men carry about duration is so consistently and so poorly calibrated to reality, and what the research actually tells us about what produces genuine sexual satisfaction for both partners. I am Dr. Julia Rhodes, a men's sex therapist with over a decade of experience working with different couples and helping men regain their sexual health and strength back. Before we get into the content, please subscribe to this channel and turn on your notifications if you have not already. Every week, I publish honest, evidence-based content on men's sexual and relational health that is designed to replace the anxiety-generating myths most men have absorbed with the accurate clinical picture. Share this video with a man in your life who needs to hear this. And now, let us get into the research. Part 1, where the anxiety comes from, and why the reference points are wrong. Before we look at the data, I want to spend a moment on the same question I always begin with when discussing sexual performance anxiety. Where did the benchmark come from? What is the source of the number or standard against which men are measuring themselves and finding themselves inadequate? For duration specifically, the answer is a combination of sources, and none of them are accurate representations of real sexual experience. Pornographic content, which as I have discussed in other videos, functions as the primary informal sexual education for most men, systematically distorts duration in the same way it distorts everything else about sex. Pornographic scenes are edited, multiple takes are combined, and the performers used are selected from an extremely non-representative population. The apparent durations in commercial pornographic content bear no relationship whatsoever to the durations experienced by real couples in real, intimate encounters. Yet for men who have absorbed their sense of what is normal primarily from this source, the implicit standard is calibrated entirely against these fabricated representations. Social and cultural messaging, including the locker room talk, jokes, and casual conversations that form part of most men's early sexual socialization, consistently inflate the reported and implied durations of sexual encounters in the direction of what sounds impressive. Men do not typically share with their peers the honest duration of their most recent sexual experience. They either avoid the conversation or participate in the performance of competence that governs most male social interaction around sexuality. The result is a socialized distortion in the direction of longer duration being the norm and the marker of adequate masculinity. Media representations in film and television, while generally less explicit than pornographic content, consistently present prolonged sexual encounters as the standard of passionate, adequate sex. Brief encounters are coded as failures or as evidence of something going wrong. Extended encounters are coded as successful and satisfying. These representations are written and directed for dramatic and narrative purposes, not for accuracy. The net effect of these combined influences is that most men arrive at their intimate relationships with an internal benchmark for adequate duration that is substantially higher than what the research reveals as the actual population norm. And when their own experience falls below that inflated benchmark, they experience anxiety that is entirely a product of inaccurate information rather than of any genuine performance problem. Part 2, the research. What stopwatch data from real couples actually shows. Let me give you the data clearly, because the data is both more straightforwardly reassuring and more interesting than most presentations of it. The most widely cited and methodologically rigorous study of intravaginal ejaculation latency time, which is the clinical term for the duration of penetrative intercourse from entry to ejaculation, was conducted by Waldinger and colleagues and published in the Journal of Sexual Medicine. The study recruited 500 couples from 5 countries: the Netherlands, Spain, the United Kingdom, Turkey, and the United States. Each couple was given a stopwatch and instructed to time the duration of penetrative intercourse, specifically from the moment of vaginal penetration to the moment of ejaculation during their normal sexual encounters over a 4-week period. This methodology, while inevitably somewhat artificial, provides a considerably more objective measurement than self-report, which is consistently subject to overestimation. The findings were striking in their departure from the cultural mythology most men carry. The median intravaginal ejaculation latency time across the full sample was 5.4 minutes. The mean was 5.7 minutes. The range was extraordinarily wide, from 0.1 minutes at the shortest extreme to 55 minutes at the longest. But the central tendency of the distribution was firmly under 6 minutes. Let me repeat that in case it did not fully land. The actual measured average duration of penetrative intercourse across 500 real couples in 5 countries, measured with stopwatches during real sexual encounters, was 5.4 minutes, not 16 minutes, not 9 minutes, 5 minutes and 24 seconds. The study also found meaningful variation by country. Turkish couples had the shortest median at approximately 4.4 minutes. British couples had the longest at approximately 9.8 minutes. The other 3 countries fell between these extremes. The reasons for these national differences are not fully understood and likely reflect a combination of cultural, dietary, and physiological factors. But the cross-national consistency of the finding that average duration is well under 10 minutes is the important clinical point. Now let me put these findings alongside what men typically believe. Survey data consistently shows that men estimate the ideal duration of intercourse to be approximately 16 minutes and estimate that the average man probably lasts around 9 minutes. The actual measured average is 5.7 minutes. Men's estimate of the average is 60% higher than reality. Their estimate of the ideal is nearly 3 times higher than reality. This is a very large miscalibration, and it has very real consequences for the way men experience their own sexual performance. A man who lasts 5 or 6 minutes during penetration and who believes the average is 9 minutes and the ideal is 16 will consistently experience his own entirely average performance as a failure. He will carry anxiety into intimate encounters that creates exactly the kind of sympathetic nervous system activation that impairs the erectile quality and ejaculatory control that he is already anxious about. His inaccurate benchmark is not just emotionally uncomfortable. It is physiologically self-defeating. Part 3. What women report about preferred duration. This is where the picture becomes more nuanced and more instructive. There is a meaningful difference between what the objective data shows about actual duration and what survey research suggests women prefer. And understanding that difference has important practical implications. Survey data from large samples of women, including data from a widely cited survey of approximately 4,000 women, suggests that women's stated preference for penetrative intercourse duration is on average higher than the measured average male performance. The average stated preference in this survey was approximately 25 minutes of penetrative sex. Before drawing any conclusions from this, I want to be precise about what this survey finding does and does not mean, because the distinction is clinically important. First, this is stated preference data from a survey, not objective. Measurement. Survey data about sexual preferences is subject to social desirability effects, meaning that respondents tend to report preferences that align with what they believe is the culturally normative or desirable answer, rather than necessarily what they personally find most satisfying in practice. The same cultural inflation of duration as a marker of sexual adequacy that affects men's perceptions also affects women's stated preferences in survey contexts. Second, and more importantly, the survey asked about penetrative intercourse specifically, and the preferences expressed in survey responses do not necessarily translate into greater satisfaction in practice. Multiple studies examining actual sexual satisfaction in real couples have found that duration of penetrative intercourse is not among the primary determinants of female sexual satisfaction. The factors that most reliably predict whether a woman reports feeling sexually satisfied are consistently across the research literature, emotional connection, the quality of non-penetrative stimulation and attention, whether she achieved orgasm, and the degree to which she felt seen, desired, and attended to by her partner. Duration of penetration ranks substantially lower than all of these factors in terms of its contribution to her overall satisfaction. Third, there is an important distinction between the duration of penetration and the overall duration of an intimate encounter. A 25-minute encounter that begins with 10 to 15 minutes of attentive, responsive, non-penetrative stimulation during which she becomes fully aroused, and that includes 5 to 10 minutes of penetrative intercourse, is likely to produce considerably more genuine satisfaction for most women than a 25-minute penetrative session that does not include adequate arousal development. The focus on penetration duration as the relevant metric is itself a distortion that serves neither partner's satisfaction. This distinction matters enormously for how men direct their attention and investment during intimate encounters. The man who extends his penetrative duration through will and effort while skipping or rushing through the preceding arousal development is optimizing for the wrong variable. He is lengthening the part of the encounter that contributes relatively less to her satisfaction while neglecting the attentive, responsive, unhurried arousal development that contributes most. The inverse investment, more time and attention on her full arousal before penetration and less preoccupation with penetrative duration, is consistently more likely to produce the outcome both partners actually want. I want to offer one more practical reframe on the duration question before we move on. Duration anxiety in men is typically focused on a fear of ending too soon, but there is another dimension of the duration question that rarely gets discussed: pacing. Minutes during penetration, but who moves at a relentless, unchanging, rapid pace throughout, is providing a qualitatively different and generally less satisfying experience than a man who lasts 5 minutes, but who varies his pace, slows at moments of heightened connection, pauses deliberately, and maintains genuine attentiveness to her responses throughout duration, is a one-dimensional measure of a multidimensional experience. Pacing, variation, presence, and responsiveness are more relevant to the quality of that experience than the total number of minutes it occupies. Part 4, Intravaginal Ejaculation Latency Time, the clinical framework. The clinical term intravaginal ejaculation latency time deserves some unpacking because understanding what it measures and what it does not measure is important for interpreting the research correctly and avoiding a new set of misunderstandings. IELTS measures specifically and only the duration from vaginal penetration to ejaculation. It does not measure overall sexual encounter length, which includes everything before penetration. It does not measure quality of stimulation or attentiveness. It does not measure female arousal level or satisfaction. It does not measure the emotional quality of the encounter. It measures a single mechanical variable: how many minutes elapsed between two specific physical events. This means that IELTS is a useful clinical metric for diagnosing conditions like premature ejaculation, which has a formal clinical definition based partly on consistently brief IELTS, but it is a very incomplete proxy for sexual performance quality in the broader sense. A man whose IELTS is consistently 2 minutes, but who invests 30 minutes in attentive foreplay and non-penetrative stimulation before penetration may be providing a considerably richer and more satisfying sexual experience for his partner than a man whose IELTS is 15 minutes, but whose overall approach to intimacy is rushed, inattentive, and perfunctor. This clinical context matters because many men's anxiety about duration is specifically focused on IELTS, on how long the penetrative portion of sex lasts. And while IELTS is a clinically measurable variable, its importance to overall sexual satisfaction is considerably smaller than the anxiety most men attach to it. Part 5. Premature ejaculation, clinical definition, and what actually helps. Since IELTS and duration anxiety are so closely related to concerns about premature ejaculation, I want to address this topic directly and with the clinical precision it deserves. Premature ejaculation has a formal clinical definition. According to the International Society of Sexual Medicine, premature ejaculation is defined as a male sexual dysfunction characterized by ejaculation that always or nearly always occurs prior to or within approximately 1 minute of vaginal penetration. An inability to delay ejaculation on all or nearly all vaginal penetrations, or nearly all vaginal penetrations, or nearly all vaginal penetrations, and negative personal consequences such as distress, bother, frustration, or the avoidance of sexual intimacy. All three criteria must be present for a clinical diagnosis. By this definition, a man who consistently lasts 2 minutes, 3 minutes, or even 4 minutes during penetration does not have premature ejaculation in the clinical sense, even though he may feel that he does. The clinical threshold for premature ejaculation as a diagnosable condition is ejaculation within approximately 1 minute of penetration consistently and with associated distress. Men who do meet this clinical definition should know that premature ejaculation is one of the most common and most treatable male sexual dysfunctions. Evidence-based treatment options include behavioral techniques such as the stop-start method and the squeeze technique, which train voluntary ejaculatory control through deliberate practice. Pelvic floor physiotherapy address the anxiety and self-monitoring patterns that perpetuate premature ejaculation through the stress response cycle I have described. Certain topical anesthetic agents reduce penile sensitivity and can extend duration. And certain medications, including selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, have a well-documented side effect of delaying ejaculation and are prescribed specifically for this purpose in appropriate cases. I also want to address something that is not clinical premature ejaculation, but that is one of the most common contributors to reduced ejaculatory control in otherwise healthy men. Performance anxiety about duration itself. The man who enters an intimate encounter already monitoring his own ejaculatory timeline, already aware of the self-imposed benchmark he is trying to meet, and already priming his threat response system with the anticipation of possible failure, is creating the precise physiological conditions under which ejaculatory control is most difficult to maintain. Cortisol and adrenaline elevated by performance anxiety increase sympathetic nervous system tone throughout the body, including in the pelvic region. And this elevation of sympathetic tone is one of the direct biological drivers of reduced ejaculatory latency. The most effective single intervention for duration anxiety that falls short of clinical premature ejaculation is replacing the duration benchmark with the satisfaction benchmark. The question to hold in mind during intimacy is not how long has it been, but rather, is she building? Is she responding? Am I present and attentive? That shift in focus from a stopwatch you are trying to outrun to genuine curious attention to the person in front of you removes the anxiety that is undermining your control and simultaneously produces the quality of presence that most powerfully shapes her experience. If you are genuinely experiencing premature ejaculation that meets the clinical criteria and that is causing you distress or affecting your relationships, speaking to your doctor is the appropriate first step. This is an extremely common condition, and there is no reason to navigate it without clinical support. Part 6. What actually determines sexual satisfaction? The evidence. Let me bring together the practical implications of everything I have shared with a clear statement of what the research consistently identifies as the actual determinants of sexual satisfaction for both partners, because this is ultimately more clinically useful than any data about average duration. For women, the factors most consistently associated with sexual satisfaction in the research literature are whether she experienced orgasm, the quality and duration of non-penetrative stimulation and attention before and during the encounter, the degree of emotional connection and felt safety with her partner's attentiveness to her verbal and nonverbal responses, and her overall sense of being genuinely desired and cared for throughout the experience. Duration of penetration appears in these analyses as a secondary factor with considerably less predictive power than any of the above. For men, the factors most consistently associated with sexual satisfaction are the quality of emotional connection with the partner, the degree of mutual engagement and genuine responsiveness during the encounter, freedom from performance anxiety and self-monitoring, and the partner's evident enjoyment and satisfaction. The duration of penetration, interestingly, is not a strong predictor of men's own reported satisfaction either. What men consistently describe as most satisfying is not lasting longer, but being more fully present, more genuinely connected, and more clearly aware that their partner is having an experience she values and enjoys. These are qualities of attention and relationship, not of anatomical endurance. This convergence of findings points consistently and clearly to the same conclusion. Sexual satisfaction is generated primarily by emotional quality, attentiveness, mutual engagement, and the absence of anxiety, not by the duration of any single mechanical component of the encounter. The man who invests his attention in creating the conditions for his partner's genuine arousal and satisfaction, who remains present and responsive throughout, and who approaches intimacy as a shared experience rather than a performance to be measured and evaluated, is providing something that no duration metric can quantify and that produces deep, genuine satisfaction for both partners, far more reliably than any extension of IELTS ever could. The number you have been carrying around as your benchmark for adequate duration is almost certainly wrong. The real average is lower than you think, and the real drivers of satisfaction have almost nothing to do with how many minutes elapse during penetration. Replace the inaccurate benchmark with the accurate one. Redirect your attention from self-monitoring to genuine presence with your partner, and invest the attention you have been giving to duration in the factors that actually shape the experience for both of you. I want to leave you with a thought that I find clinically useful and that I share with the men I work with. The man who lasts longest is not necessarily, and in fact is rarely, the man who provides the most satisfying intimate experience. The man who creates the most satisfying intimate experience is the man who is most fully present, most genuinely curious about his partner's experience, most unhurried in his approach to her arousal, and most attentive to what she communicates, both verbally and through her body throughout the encounter. That man can have an IELTS of 4 minutes or 14 minutes and produce the same quality of experience, because the quality of the experience is not housed in the IELTS. It is housed in the quality of attention, presence, and genuine care that surrounds it. If today's video gave you something genuinely useful and clarifying about your own performance and the benchmarks you have been carrying, please do 3 things right now. Hit the like button because it helps more men find this content at exactly the moment they need it. Leave a comment below and tell me whether today's data surprised you. And please subscribe with notifications on if you have not already, because every week I am here with the honest, evidence-based guidance on men's sexual health that you deserve. I am Dr. Julia Rodeses. I will see you in the next